What are the gene keys? They help us with three things. First of all is purpose. And what I mean here is your higher purpose, what your soul is meant to do this time around. And to do that, we have to settle into our physical body and to know that everything that happens to us is happening to us for a reason. And that reason is so that we can become the person that we need to be in order to serve our higher purpose. The second piece is relationships. And the goal there is to learn about your patterns and your wounding and to understand how you interact with the world and to understand how the people and places and things that you are in relationship with are there to teach you some of the deepest lessons that you could possibly learn. The Gene Keys uses relationships as a means of furthering our spiritual growth. And then finally, the third piece is prosperity. And prosperity is, yes, it's wealth, it's money, but it's also thriving in relationships and knowing your sense of purpose. There's so many different pieces to prosperity versus wealth, which is an accumulation. And it's not to say that you won't accumulate wealth, but it is to say that there are other pieces to a happy, prosperous life. And the Gene Keys teach us how we interact with people in business and what we're designed to bring out to the world and who we're meant to work with in this final phase about prosperity. Now, the way that it does these things is through what's called your hologenetic profile. And you can go to genekeys.com and click genetic free profile. And it's going to ask you for your birth data and you'll enter that in and you're going to get this big map looking thing that's got all sorts of circles and lines. And contained in those circles are different gene keys that pertain to different areas of your life. So if we go back, we said that number one was purpose. And this is tied to what's called the activation sequence. And it's my advice and the advice of Richard Rudd, the founder of the Gene Keys, to start here. It all starts with coming into your body because you need to feel at home. You need to feel safe yourself before we introduce the second part with relationships. And you need to have an understanding of what you're here to do and who you're meant to serve before we start worrying about the pearl sequence, which is prosperity. So the activation sequence contains 4 different spheres, and they are the life's work, which is at the very top of your profile, the evolution, the third is the radiance, and then finally we've got the sphere of purpose. And the activation sequence is the first step of what's called the golden path. And the golden path is the way that we weave through the profile in order to learn about those 3 things that I mentioned earlier. So your life's work is all about what you're meant to do out in the world. Your evolution is your life's biggest challenge. It's the thing that drives your evolution, right? We learn from the challenges that the world presents to us. Radiance is your inner light. It's your aura. It's the thing that's going to shine out into the world. And then finally is your purpose, which isn't doing anything. That's your life's work. Your purpose is a way of being in the world. And so when you work through your activation sequence, you're going to go 1 sphere at a time. Now within each of these spheres, you're going to have a specific gene key. And it's going to be numbered 1 through 64. And each one is tied to essentially an archetype. And those archetypes are derived back through a 5,000-year-old wisdom called the I Ching. And each one represents an energy, if you will. And then we split that energy into 3 component pieces. So we've got first the shadow. And this is our unconscious pattern-based behavior. It's associated with a victim mindset. It's a way of thinking about the world that things are happening to you, and you have this woe is me attitude, and either you repress that energy and you give up, you turn inside of yourself and just kind of live a bland, good enough life that in your heart of hearts you know is not what you're meant to be doing. Or it's expressive, and that means casting out the feeling that you're feeling. So you're blaming somebody else for that energy instead of owning it yourself. The next one is the gift. And this is where we want to spend the bulk of our time. So the advice is about 10% of your time here in the shadow and about 90% of your time in the gift in the next one, which I'll talk about in a moment. But the gift is the creative energy that we can take from the shadow. It's the same energy, we just deal with it at a higher frequency. And the Gene Keys gradually teach us how to start to break that pattern behavior and how to respond in a different way. And when we respond in a different way, we get a different thing attracted into our life. The way that I like to sort of help people understand this is if you think of the energy of excitement and nervousness, that is the same energy field. What's different there is how you are interpreting that energy. We either interpret it as we're excited, we've got a lot pumping through us, we're a little bit shaky maybe, but we know that this is going to be something great that's going to come from this. Or we have nervousness where we feel scared, we have fear, we're worried about the outcome. Those are the same thing. It's all about how you choose to work with it, what you're going to do with it. And that's the difference between the shadow and the gift. And our goal is to express our gifts more and more often. It's important to know that you don't go from the shadow to the gift and then just stay. This is a constant back and forth, and even into our third and final frequency band is what's called the Siddhi. And the Siddhi is like the divine expression of that energy. In all of the Siddhis, the ego is gone. It is universal energy. God energy is flowing through you. And these are the things that when you're looking at your gene key, we want to hold that in the back of our brain always. That's the ultimate expression of what's possible with that energy. And what you'll find is you're going to go from shadow to gift to Siddhi to shadow, back and forth. And the Siddhis oftentimes, at least for me, it's a quick touch into that energy. I'm not at a place where it's sustained all of the time. But what doesn't happen is I get to the Siddhi and then I'm at the Siddhi for the rest of my life until you're fully awakened. And who knows how long that is. The goal of the Gene Keys is to march you closer towards awakening. However, awakening comes in its own time. And a big part of the Gene Keys is patience and what's called contemplation. So contemplation is a mix of 2 things. It's meditation on one side and concentration on the other. And with contemplation, what we're doing is holding an idea or holding an energy in our mind, but so loosely. So the visual I want to give you is imagine like a box that's got a secret clasp on it. And you're just kind of moving your hands around that box, not forcing, not pushing, because that's not going to help you to find it. But if we just move it around and give it time, and all of a sudden we find that catch. We're not totally in a meditative state because there is some activity there, but we're also not concentrating because staring right at it is the thing that's going to stop us from feeling the energy, from integrating it into ourselves. And contemplation is the most important part with the gene keys. So as you work your way through the activation sequence or the next sequences that I'm going to talk about, we want to go into contemplation, which is what allows us to make a connection between the shadow and the gift, and even the shadow and the Siddhi. And then when you make that connection, you can start to notice when the shadow is showing up in your life versus when the gift is showing up in your life. And that's the first step, is just noticing. Oftentimes people try to move too fast. They wanna get from sphere to sphere. They wanna understand it all. And it stops them from letting this wisdom come in. That's important. This is a wisdom stream. This is an energy that's going to do the work for you as long as you stick with it, as long as you continue to contemplate and you keep rolling it around. We don't just want to contemplate the key, the shadow, the gift, and the Siddhi of each key, but we also want to contemplate, so we can, right? Key, and that'll be numbered 1 through 64, but we also want to contemplate the sphere itself. So like I said, each of the spheres in your profile, like the sphere of life's work as an example, represent a part of your life. So life's work is what you're meant to do in the world. Compare that to the sphere of your SQ, which is your spiritual quotient, if you will. And it is all about opening your heart. It's the energy that unlocks this flood of love. So we can contemplate what the spheres mean. And then the last part that I haven't touched on yet is what are called the lines. The lines are actually contained in the key when you look at your profile. And we want to contemplate those lines as well. So there's a bunch of stuff to think about. And the lines are going to be numbered 1 through 6. So when you look at your profile, you're going to see, for example, 32.6, just as a frame of reference. And 32, this number is the gene key. And 6, this number is the line. And the lines flavor the gene key. They have it express in a certain way. And I've actually done videos for each of the 6 lines through every single sphere in the profile. So check those out if you want to learn more. He doesn't talk about, he being Richard Rudd, doesn't talk about the lines in the main Gene Keys book. However, if you do the activation sequence course or buy the activation sequence book, same with Venus sequence and Pearl sequence, he goes through in depth what each of those line keynotes mean. And I highly recommend doing that. However, you can also watch the videos that I already made. Lots of people say that they're super helpful. Those 6 lines in every sphere are the same energy, kind of like a key is the same through shadow, gift, and Siddhi. However, they express a little bit differently depending on what sphere they are in. So for example, this 6th line, this is actually my gene key in the sphere of life's work. And the 6th line there is the teacher. You compare that with the 6th line at the sphere of evolution, which is the 2nd sphere in that activation pathway, and it's education and surrender. So how do those things go together? Well, obviously, teacher and education, we can immediately link those. If you remember, the sphere of evolution is your biggest challenge in your life. So in order for me to overcome my biggest challenge, I'm going to need to learn a bunch of different things in my life. And that means learning some lessons, having some tough times, because that is how we start to take that shadow energy into the gift energy. But I need that education. I need those experiences because I am meant to teach. Remember, this is my life's work, what I'm meant to do in the world. And teaching doesn't need to be literal. That's important for all of these line keynotes. They don't need to be literal. They are kind of like a general field. So I don't have to be in a classroom teaching. What I'm doing right now is teaching. And then surrender, how does that tie in? Well, in order to learn these lessons, I have to surrender into them. And in order to teach, I have to surrender to the time that it takes to become an expert in order to teach other things. So that's an example of how the lines work. And then combining them. So 32 is failure, preservation, veneration. And then I already said the sixth line is the teacher. So I am here to teach people how to preserve their energy, how to focus on what really matters to them instead of focusing on how to avoid failure. That same energy turns into preservation, which is instead of avoiding failure, it's choosing what is most important. What is the thing that I think the world needs more of, that we need to bring from our current or past into our future? And so your job, when you look at your profile, is to combine the line and the sphere. So for me, right now, what I'm doing is teaching about preservation, right? I'm teaching you this wisdom stream. I'm teaching you about a way to reconnect with yourself and reconnect to the universe and to God so that you can live your highest and best life. Okay, so that is activation sequence and a little bit about the lines and keys. Now the next piece, like I said, is relationships. And this is the beefy part of the golden path. This is where we start to look at our wounding patterns and where we start to understand the mechanics of the universe through our dharma and through our karma. So it actually starts in the same sphere of purpose. So if you remember, the activation sequence ended in purpose, the Venus sequence begins in purpose. However, because it's purpose as it relates to our relationships, it holds a totally different energy. That same key is going to be in there, but like I said, one of the things we need to contemplate is the sphere itself. And this now isn't your purpose in life overall, it's your purpose in relationship, your purpose in opening your heart and opening the heart of others. Then, and I'm not going to walk all the way through this, but I'm going to touch on a couple of different pieces. So this part here is kind of like the workings of the universe. It describes the mechanics of the universe. So our sphere of attraction is powered here by the pathway of Dharma. So this is all about learning your soul's lessons. And whatever lessons you're meant to learn, your sphere of attraction is going to pull people, places, and things to you that help you learn that lesson. Now, this sphere, which I'm going to make a little bit bigger because it's important, is the sphere of IQ. And it connects to the sphere of EQ. And then up here, the sphere of SQ. And this is the meat of the relationship work. So each of these spheres ties to a patterning that you have that you picked up as you were developing. So the IQ here relates to 14 to 21 years old, and it's the mental pattern that you have that dictates how your thoughts interact with the world, the things that you focus on, how you interpret wisdom and knowledge that you gain, how your mind works when you're in a conversation. Then we get to our EQ, which we built from the ages of 7 to 14. And this is about your emotional responses to things. It's a layer deeper. This is mental, this is astral. It's a layer deeper, and it is where our anger, our joy, our peace, the EQ teaches us how to respond when we feel that overwhelming energy. And it's what you learned from 7 to 14 years old when you got that boost of juice, right? Where like you didn't know what to do because you were overwhelmed with emotion, and a pattern begins to form when that happens. And our EQ helps us break down that pattern. And then finally, we've got our SQ, which is developed from 0 to 7. And that ties to our physical body. It ties to our heart. It's all about unconditional love. And the only way that we can love unconditionally is if we love ourselves unconditionally and we open our heart completely. So this is the beefy work of that Venus work. It's worth spending quite a bit of time with these spheres. And when you do that, you're unpicking the weave of your wounding patterns. And when you start to see these patterns in your life, you can start to act differently as they show up, which gradually is what raises our frequency over time. And then finally, the last sphere here is what's called the sphere of your core. And this is the deepest wound. It actually happens from 0 to 9 months in the womb. So nothing happened in your life to give you your core wound. You're born into this world with a sense of separateness, right? Before we came here, we were all part of the one. And then we're born, and immediately our fragment of the one gets separated. And our whole journey throughout life, it doesn't matter which sequence it is all about reunion with that one. Because when you reunite with it, it helps us to see that there is no other person that I need to battle against with my IQ or with my emotions. We're all the same thing. And so the Venus sequence helps us to settle into ourselves so that we can relate to people in a way that serves the world, it serves you. It basically is the choice of going back to being a victim versus choosing freedom. If you let somebody upset you, if you let somebody spill their emotion onto you, then you don't have the clarity yet that you need to understand that that has nothing to do with you. That's that person's reaction. And so the Venus sequence helps us to open into that feeling. And then finally, we get to prosperity. And this is what's called the Pearl sequence. And the Pearl sequence, actually, same as, remember, purpose down here was the same sphere in activation as it is in Venus. Well, your Pearl sequence begins with what's called the sphere of vocation. And that actually is the same sphere as the core. And so what happens is we take our deepest wound and we're able to transmute it to learn from that energy. And that is what becomes our greatest gift out into the world. We learned how to use it, and then that becomes our inner driver to serve all the other people that are around us. Remember, vocation isn't life's work. It's not what you're doing, but it's the inner motor that drives your doing. And then we come over here and we've got the sphere of your culture. And this ties to how you fit into the greater picture, how you fit into the collective. Who are you meant to work with? How are you meant to work? So for example, I'm a first line here, which is all about going within. And so my culture is all about being an entrepreneur, bringing something out into the world and helping to guide it. Compare that with the, let's say, the second line, which is about partnership. So for you to find prosperity, it's about attaching yourself to another person or another idea to bring that out into the world. Then we come up here, and this was actually the same sphere as the sphere of our life's work. So we've got another sphere doing double duty, but in the Pearl sequence, it changes over to what's called our brand. And your brand, your life's work is kind of like your ego's way of seeing what you're meant to do in the world. The brand is how your soul sees what it's meant to do in the world. It is your inner essence as it shows up in the outside world. It's your flavor. It's how people hear your tone of voice, see the clothes that you're wearing. All of those things tie into our brand, but they're driven from our soul, not from needing to look a certain way for certain people. And then finally in the center, we've got our pearl, which is where the sequence gets its namesake. And the pearl is kind of like reaping the harvest. This is what starts to show all of these spheres are connected to the pearl. They all feed in. And when that happens, we get this transcendent layer, this transcendent gift. And when you fully settle into that, you know that you're fully in prosperity. And some people will need lots of money to feel prosperous, whether that's to give it away or it's that they're building something that requires a lot of funding to build because their purpose is in building something huge. Or you could be on the opposite side of the spectrum. You could be on the more simple side of the spectrum where it's about not needing money. In fact, money would make you unhappy. You would feel overwhelmed. There would be too much to do. So it's not how much money you have, it's how good do you feel? How in balance do you feel with all the different pieces of your relationship? So those are the three sequences that make up what's called the golden path, which is the entire hologenetic profile. And we typically are encouraged to do it in order, but always listen to your intuition. Your intuition when you're working with the gene keys is number one. And that could even mean the key that's in there. Maybe something is off a little bit with your birth time or something like that, and you can use your intuition to know what actually should be there. Also, your intuition will guide you in how long you need to stay in each sphere, where you need to go. So although there are recommendations, always default to your intuition because it knows best. A couple things to keep in mind. We really want to stay gentle as we work our way through this process. You cannot force any of this stuff. It all takes time. So giving yourself patience. This is not a wisdom that you can go to for a month or two and get the outcomes from it that I just went through. It takes a ton of time. You know, it's going to be 6 months to a year before maybe you even feel much of anything shift. I'm a few years in and I still am going through these shifts and noticing new things every day. A couple cool things to keep your eyes peeled for as you work through this. First is changes in your physical body. And I know that sounds crazy, but this is called the gene keys because these codes are contained in your genetics. So we know now about epigenetics, which basically are the environmental factors that lead to how our genes express. And it's the gene keys belief that when we raise our frequency, our genes begin to express things differently, which means literally our physiology shifts. Our hormones begin to change. We begin to feel more joy, more peace. But not only that, the physical structure of our body begins to change. People in their genius have an upright posture. They have an open chest, an open throat. And so you'll start to feel these shifts in your spine, and the tension that you had in your body for so long is going to start to let go. Another thing to keep in mind here, or to look for here, are moments of grace. The gene keys are designed to open moments of grace, which is the force of God, the force of the universe reaching down to you to help you to see something in a new way, to help you evolve. And those moments can be so beautiful. Typically, you know, there's going to be tears involved or a really deep sense of emotion. And it can feel like a flood. It can feel really overwhelming. What you'll learn though is that each of those moments opens up something new in your life and in the world. Essentially, the gene keys teach us that magic is real. Magic is something that each of us have access to in our life if we believe the stories. And the gene keys combine lots of different wisdom streams. You'll see Christ mentioned in there. You'll see the Buddha mentioned in there. You'll see alchemy mentioned in there. All of these different paths lead us to the same place. They all lead us to knowing and trusting in this force greater than us. And when we do that, we can fully inhabit our body, which allows us to be in relationship with people in a way that is beneficial and beautiful and loving, which then allows us to use those relationships as we bring our gifts to the world and seek prosperity. It's important to mix your doing with your being, though. As you go through this, remember the art of contemplation. Take it slow. Take one thing at a time. Know that everything is happening for you, and it will open up to you when it's time to open up to you, so long as you stick with the contemplation. So those are the gene keys in a nutshell. Go and get your free profile. Take a look at all of the different energies that you have and how they express in your life. Take your time. Enjoy the journey. This is life-changing. This changed my life and continues to change my life. That's why I teach about it. That's why I'm passionate about it. Finally, I'll leave you with this. This wisdom is designed to bring us together. It's designed to help the collective step out of the fear frequency and into the love frequency. It's designed to link what's called the synarchy. This group of people that is here to change the path that the world is on. And so if you feel called to this wisdom, I encourage you to stay with it, to stick with it, because you have a role, you have a responsibility to become what you are meant to become so that the world begins to shift. Talking about it is one thing. Being a part of it is something totally different. If you are interested in a community and talking about this with somebody, or if you have questions from everything that I just went through, I know it can feel like drinking through a fire hose. I do what are called wisdom calls. Right now I'm doing them about every 2 weeks. The next one is on July 26th at noon, and I'll put the link to register for it. And I'd love to see you there. Basically, it's a bunch of people that are in the Gene Keys wisdom, all different stages, and it's a curated conversation. I don't teach there. I engage with somebody, we have a conversation, we see what comes up, and then we let everyone chime in on the things that came up for them. And specific people will talk and provide their wisdom and how they work through something. So it's not like everybody is sharing something, but we go where the conversation needs to go, and they have been incredibly valuable and beautiful thus far. So I'd love to see you there at one of those. If you've been a longtime subscriber of the channel, thank you for being here, listening to this refresher, and we'll get back to our pathways here in a few days. Until next time.